Sarah Martinez wiped down the counter at the diner for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The smell of coffee and bacon grease had long stopped bothering her. It was almost comforting now, a reminder that she was still standing, still fighting. Her shift started at 5 in the morning and wouldn't end until 2 in the afternoon. Then she had exactly 45 minutes to get to her second job at the supermarket across town in Phoenix, Arizona. Her son, Tommy, was 7 years old. 7 years of doing this alone. 7 years since Jake walked out, leaving nothing but a note on the kitchen table and a bank account that had been emptied. Sarah remembered that morning like it was yesterday. Tommy had been just 6 months old, crying in his crib, and she stood there holding that note, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath her feet. But she didn't have time to fall apart. She never did. Tommy was everything to her. His bright green eyes, the same color as hers, always seemed to notice when she was tired. He would climb into her lap without asking and rest his head on her shoulder. He never complained about the thrift store clothes or the fact that they lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town where the paint peeled from the walls and the heating barely worked in winter. What broke Sarah's heart wasn't the poverty. She had grown up poor herself in a small town in New Mexico. She knew how to stretch a dollar, how to make beans and rice taste different 7 nights in a row. What killed her was watching Tommy at school. She had gone to pick him up early one Tuesday for a dentist appointment. Through the chain-link fence surrounding the playground, she saw them. The other boys playing catch with their fathers. It was some kind of father-son sports day that she had completely forgotten about. The flyer had probably gotten lost in the pile of bills on her kitchen counter. Tommy stood alone by the swing set watching. Just watching. His small hands gripped the metal chain, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the way his shoulders slumped. He wasn't crying. That would have been easier somehow. He just stood there, accepting his isolation like it was normal. Sarah's throat had tightened. She wanted to run onto that playground, scoop him up, be both mother and father and everything he needed. But she couldn't be. She couldn't teach him how to throw a football properly or show him how to change a tire or tell him what it meant to be a man in this world. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with a cup of tea she had reheated 3 times without drinking. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sirens. Phoenix never really slept. She thought about her own father. He had been a mechanic, hands always stained with oil, voice rough from cigarettes. But he had been there. Every school play, every scraped knee, every moment she needed him. He died when she was 19 and she still missed him every single day. Tommy deserved that. He deserved someone. The idea came to her at 2 in the morning when she should have been sleeping. Big brothers, big sisters. She had seen a billboard for it on her drive to work. Mentorship programs for kids without father figures. It was perfect. The next morning before her shift, Sarah called the number. The woman on the phone was kind, patient as Sarah explained her situation in rushed whispers during her break. There was a waiting list, the woman said. It could be months. But Sarah put Tommy's name down anyway. Months turned into a year. Sarah called every few weeks, always getting the same answer. They were working on it. They had a lot of families in need. She understood. Of course she understood. But understanding didn't help the growing worry in her chest every time she watched Tommy become more withdrawn, more quiet. He was being bullied now. She found out by accident when she was putting away his laundry, and found a ripped shirt stuffed in the back of his drawer. When she asked him about it, he just shrugged. They call me names, he had said quietly. They say I don't have a dad because he didn't want me. Sarah had held him while he cried. She told him that wasn't true, that his father leaving had nothing to do with him, that he was loved and wanted and perfect. But what could words do against the cruelty of children? What could her love do when what he needed was something she couldn't give him? She started looking into other options. Local community centers, church programs, anything. That's when she found the flyer at the library. It was old, slightly faded, pinned to a community board between advertisements for yard sales and lost cats. Veterans Mentorship Initiative. The paper listed a phone number and an email address. Sarah took a picture of it with her phone. That evening, after Tommy was asleep and her feet ached from 10 hours of standing, Sarah sat on her bed and typed out an email. She kept it simple. Single mother. 7-year-old son. Looking for a positive male role model. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. She didn't expect a response. She had learned not to expect much of anything anymore. But 3 days later, her phone rang during her lunch break. The voice on the other end was gruff, older, with an accent she couldn't quite place. He said his name was Frank. He had gotten her email. He wanted to help. Sarah felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope, maybe. She was afraid to call it that. They talked for 20 minutes. Frank asked about Tommy, about what he liked to do, about school. He asked about Sarah too, which surprised her. Most people didn't bother. He told her he was part of a motorcycle club. Veterans mostly. They did community work, a motorcycle club. Sarah hesitated. She had seen bikers before, leather jackets and loud engines looking dangerous and unpredictable, but Frank's voice was steady, reassuring. He told her they were good men who had served their country and wanted to give back. They arranged for Frank to meet Tommy at a local park the following Saturday. Neutral ground, Sarah insisted. Frank agreed without argument. That Saturday morning, Sarah woke up before her alarm. She made Tommy pancakes, something they rarely had time for. He asked why today was special, and she told him they were meeting someone new. A friend who wanted to spend time with him. Tommy looked suspicious. He had learned to be cautious, her boy. Life had taught him that already. At the park, Sarah held Tommy's hand as they walked to the meeting spot. She scanned the area, looking for an older man on a motorcycle. What she saw instead made her stop in her tracks. There were 30 of them, 30 men in leather vests standing in formation near the parking lot. Their motorcycles gleamed in the morning sun, chrome catching the light. Each vest bore patches and pins, military insignia, American flags. Sarah's first instinct was to turn around, to grab Tommy and run. This was too much. This was wrong. She had asked for one mentor, not an entire gang. But then one of them stepped forward. He was older, maybe late 60s, with gray hair and a weathered face that had seen things Sarah couldn't imagine. His eyes were kind. Frank, he said, extending his hand. Sarah couldn't speak. Tommy pressed against her leg, uncertain. Frank knelt down to Tommy's level. He didn't touch him, didn't crowd him. He just smiled. Your mom told me you like dinosaurs, Frank said. Is that true? Tommy nodded slowly. Me too, Frank said. When I was your age, I wanted to be a paleontologist. You know what that is? Someone who studies dinosaur bones, Tommy whispered. That's right, Frank said, his smile widening. You're a smart kid. Then Frank stood and turned to Sarah. His expression grew serious. I know this looks like a lot, he said quietly, but when I told the boys about Tommy, about what you wrote in your email, every single one of them wanted to come. These men are fathers, grandfathers. They're teachers and firefighters and construction workers. They served their country and now they want to serve their community. He gestured to the group behind him. We all know what it's like to miss important moments with our kids because of deployment. We know what it's like to come home and try to make up for lost time. And we know that there are good kids out there who need what we can give. Sarah looked at the 30 men standing there. They weren't threatening. They were waiting, respectful, letting her make the decision. Some of them had tears in their eyes. One of them, a younger man with a prosthetic leg visible below his jeans, stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, his voice thick with emotion, my daughter grew up without me for 3 years while I was overseas. I missed her first steps, her first words. I would give anything to have those years back. But I can't. What I can do is make sure another kid doesn't feel alone. Sarah felt her own eyes burning. She looked down at Tommy, who was staring at the men with wonder now instead of fear. What do you think, baby? She asked softly. Do you want to hang out with these guys today? Tommy looked up at her, then back at Frank, then at all 30 men standing there in the morning sun. All of them? He asked, his voice small but curious. All of us, Frank confirmed. Tommy nodded and Sarah watched as 30 grown men visibly relaxed. Frank reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small plastic dinosaur, a T-Rex. He handed it to Tommy. For your collection, he said. Tommy took it carefully, turning it over in his hands like it was made of gold. What followed was the strangest and most beautiful morning Sarah had ever experienced. The men didn't overwhelm Tommy. They took turns, each one introducing themselves, telling him a little about who they were. There was Marcus, who had been a Marine and now taught high school math. There was Pete, who had lost his left arm in Afghanistan and now ran a food truck. There was Miguel, whose grandfather had ridden with the original Hells Angels decades ago. and who now volunteered at the VA hospital. They taught Tommy how to check the tire pressure on a motorcycle. They showed him the different patches on their vests and what each one meant. They talked to him about respect, about honor, about taking care of the people you love. And they listened when Tommy talked about dinosaurs, truly listened, asking questions and acting genuinely interested. Sarah stood to the side, watching, her heart so full it hurt. When the morning ended, Frank approached her again. "We'd like to make this regular," he said. "If that's okay with you. Once a week, maybe more. We can help with other things too. I noticed your car has a busted taillight. Miguel is a mechanic. Pete can help with homework. And if you ever need anything at all, you call me." He handed her a card with his number on it. Sarah took it with shaking hands. She didn't trust her voice, so she just nodded. Over the next 3 months, everything changed. Tommy came alive in a way Sarah had never seen. Every Saturday, Frank and at least 5 or 6 of the other men would pick Tommy up and take him somewhere. Sometimes it was just to the park. Sometimes they went to a museum or a baseball game. They never let Sarah pay for anything, no matter how much she insisted. Miguel fixed her car without being asked. When her refrigerator broke down, Pete showed up with a replacement he said he had gotten for free from a friend, though Sarah suspected he had paid for it himself. When Tommy needed new shoes for school, Marcus took him shopping and came back with not just shoes but a whole bag of clothes. Sarah tried to refuse, tried to maintain some dignity, some independence. But Frank sat her down one evening while Tommy was showing the other guys his dinosaur collection. "Let us do this," he said gently. "You've been carrying the weight alone for too long. There's no shame in accepting help. That's what community is. That's what family is." Family. The word made Sarah's chest ache. But not everyone saw it that way. It started small. Whispers at the diner. Looks from other mothers at Tommy's school. Sarah noticed but tried to ignore it. She was used to judgment. Single mothers always were. Then came the phone call from Principal Henderson. "Mrs. Martinez, I need you to come to the school. It's about Tommy and some concerns we have." Sarah's stomach dropped. She left work early, her manager giving her a disapproving look that said this was becoming a habit. At the school, Principal Henderson sat behind his desk, his expression grave. Next to him was Cheryl Bradford, the president of the PTA, a woman Sarah had never spoken to but who always seemed to be watching her. "Mrs. Martinez," Principal Henderson began, folding his hands on the desk. "We've received some complaints from other parents about the men you've been allowing around your son." Sarah felt like she had been slapped. "What?" Cheryl leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Several parents have seen these motorcycle gang members picking up Tommy. We're worried about the message that sends, about the safety of all our children." "They're not a gang," Sarah said, her voice tight. "They're veterans. They're mentors. They've been nothing but good to Tommy." Principal Henderson held up a hand. "I'm sure they're nice people, Mrs. Martinez, but you have to understand how it looks. 30 men in leather jackets and motorcycles. Some parents are frightened. They're concerned about gang activity near the school." Gang activity? Sarah could barely believe what she was hearing. These men served our country. They're teachers, firefighters, fathers. They've done more for Tommy in 3 months than anyone else has done in his entire life. Cheryl's expression hardened. "That may be, but we have policies about who can pick up children from school. We need background checks, proper documentation. And frankly, the optics are concerning." "The optics," Sarah repeated slowly. "You're worried about how it looks." "We're worried about safety," Principal Henderson corrected, though his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Sarah stood up, her hands trembling with rage. "Tommy has been bullied at this school for 2 years. 2 years I've come to you, told you about the names he's been called, the way he's been excluded and hurt. And what did you do? You told me boys will be boys. You told me to teach him to be tougher. Mrs. Martinez, please calm down. Don't tell me to calm down." Sarah's voice was rising now, all the frustration and exhaustion and fury of 7 years pouring out. "These men showed up for my son when nobody else would. They've taught him confidence and respect. They've given him role models and support. And you want to take that away because you're worried about optics? We're going to have to insist that they stop picking Tommy up from school," Cheryl said firmly. "If you want to see these men on your own time, that's your business. But not on school property." Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the desk over. to tell them exactly what she thought of their judgment and their fake concern. But she needed this school. She couldn't afford private education. She couldn't homeschool while working 2 jobs. She walked out without another word. That evening, Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot of the diner before her shift, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She called Frank and told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Frank said quietly, "We knew this might happen. People fear what they don't understand. But Sarah, you listen to me. We're not going anywhere. We just have to be smarter about it, but the school won't let you pick him up anymore. Then we'll meet him somewhere else. We'll pick him up from your apartment. We'll make it work. You don't get rid of us that easily." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why do you care so much?" Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had a daughter, Emily. She would have been 35 this year, would have been. I was deployed when she was Tommy's age. Missed 2 years of her life. When I came back, I tried to make up for it, but I was different. Angry. I had PTSD, though we didn't call it that back then. I pushed everyone away, including her."
Sarah closed her eyes, listening. "She died in a car accident when she was 17. And I never got to tell her I was sorry. I never got to be the father she deserved." Frank's voice cracked. "So when I see a kid like Tommy, a good kid who just needs someone to show up for him, I see my chance to do it right. We all do. Every man who shows up on Saturday is trying to be the person they wish they had been, or the person they needed when they were young." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing him. We see you too, Sarah. You're doing an incredible job. Don't let anyone tell you different." But it got worse before it got better. The whispers at the diner turned into comments. One regular customer, a man who had been coming in for years, actually said to Sarah's face that she should be careful about the company she kept. Another mother at Tommy's school pulled her son away when Tommy tried to join a game at recess, loud enough for everyone to hear that she didn't want her child associating with kids from troubled homes. Tommy started coming home quiet again. The light that had been growing in him began to dim. One afternoon, Sarah found him crying in his room. When she asked what was wrong, he told her that a boy at school had said the bikers were going to hurt him, that they were dangerous criminals and Tommy was stupid for trusting them. "Are they bad people, Mom?" Tommy asked, his green eyes red and swollen. "Did I do something wrong?" Sarah held him tight. "No, baby, no. They're good people. The best people I've ever known. Some folks just don't understand." But that night, lying in bed, Sarah wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she should have left well enough alone. Maybe Tommy would have been fine without the mentorship. Maybe she had just made his life harder. She thought about calling Frank, about telling him they needed to stop. It would be easier, quieter, safer. But then she remembered Tommy's face the first time Frank knelt down and talked to him about dinosaurs. She remembered the way her son had laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. She remembered him standing taller, speaking louder, believing in himself. No, she wasn't going to let fear and judgment steal that from him. The next Saturday, when Frank and 5 others showed up at their apartment, Sarah made a decision. "I want to meet all of them," she said. "All 30. I want to know their stories. And I want to figure out how we fight this." Frank smiled. "That's my girl." The meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon at the Motorcycle Club's headquarters, a large warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix that had been converted into a community space. Sarah walked in holding Tommy's hand, her heart pounding. She had never been inside a place like this before. The space was surprisingly welcoming. There were American flags on the walls, photos of the members in their military uniforms, and a large table in the center surrounded by chairs. The 30 men were already there, standing when she entered, a sign of respect that made her throat tight. Frank gestured to a chair at the head of the table. "Sarah, Tommy, please sit." For the next 2 hours, Sarah listened to their stories. Each man stood and introduced himself properly. Not just their names, but who they really were. Marcus had served 3 tours in Iraq. He came home to find his wife had left him and taken their 2 daughters. He hadn't seen them in 5 years. Working with kids like Tommy was the only thing that kept him going. Pete had lost his arm saving 3 members of his unit when their vehicle hit an IED. He spent 2 years in rehabilitation, fighting depression and addiction. Helping others gave him purpose. Miguel's son had died by suicide after returning from Afghanistan with PTSD. Miguel blamed himself for not recognizing the signs. Now he dedicated his life to supporting veterans and their families. One by one, they shared their pain, their regrets, their reasons for being there. These weren't dangerous criminals. They were broken men trying to put themselves back together by helping others. When they finished, Sarah stood up. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. I need you to know what this has cost Tommy. The other kids won't play with him anymore. The parents look at me like I'm a bad mother. The school wants to ban you from the property. And I need to know if you're willing to keep going, because if we do this, it's going to get harder before it gets easier. Frank stood up, and then all 30 men stood with him. Ma'am, Frank said, his voice strong and clear. We didn't serve our country just to come home and hide when things got difficult. We fought for freedom, for justice, for the right of every kid to have a chance at a good life. If some people want to judge us based on how we look instead of who we are, that's their problem. We're not going anywhere. The room erupted in agreement. These men, these warriors, were ready to fight for her son. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Tommy stood up from his chair and walked to Frank, wrapping his small arms around the older man's waist. Frank knelt down and hugged him back, his weathered face breaking into the gentlest smile. We're family now, Frank said softly, and family doesn't quit on each other. That's when Sarah made the decision that would change everything. If people were going to judge them anyway, if they were going to whisper and condemn without knowing the truth, then she would make sure the truth was impossible to ignore. I want to do something at the school, she said suddenly. Something public. I want everyone to see who you really are. Frank raised his eyebrows. What did you have in mind? Career day is in 3 weeks, Sarah said, her mind racing. Parents come in and talk about their jobs. What if you all came? What if you told the kids about your service, about what you do now, about why mentorship matters? Cheryl Bradford will never allow it, one of the men said. She runs that PTA like a dictatorship. Then we go over her head, Sarah replied. The school board, the superintendent. We make them listen. And if you're wondering whether this fight is worth following, if you want to see how a mother and 30 warriors take on a system that tried to silence them, then do me a favor right now and subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next, the way these men showed up for one little boy and changed an entire community, that's a story you won't want to miss. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She called the school board and requested a meeting. She was denied. She called the superintendent's office. They told her to go through proper channels. She wrote letters, sent emails, left voicemails. Nothing. Meanwhile, the situation at school got worse. Tommy was pushed off the monkey bars during recess. The teacher said it was an accident, but Tommy came home with a bruised elbow and tears in his eyes. A group of boys cornered him in the bathroom and told him his biker friends were going to prison. Sarah wanted to pull him out of school entirely, but Frank convinced her to hold on just a little longer. We're going to make this right, he promised. Then, 2 weeks before career day, something unexpected happened. A local news reporter named Jennifer Huang had been doing a story on veteran support programs in Phoenix. Someone had mentioned the motorcycle club and their mentorship work. Jennifer reached out to Frank for an interview. Frank called Sarah immediately. This could be good, he said, or it could make things worse. Sarah thought about Tommy, about the way he had started having nightmares again, about the anxiety she saw in his eyes every morning when she dropped him off at school. Let's do it, she said. The interview took place at the warehouse. Jennifer brought a camera crew and spent 3 hours filming. She interviewed Frank, Marcus, Miguel, and Pete. She interviewed Sarah and Tommy. She filmed the men working on motorcycles, teaching Tommy how to use basic tools, showing him respect and patience. When Jennifer asked Tommy what the men meant to him, he said simply, "They make me feel like I matter." The segment aired on a Friday evening. Sarah watched it at home with Tommy, her hands trembling. It was beautiful. Jennifer had captured everything, the humanity of these men, the transformation in Tommy, the simple truth that people aren't defined by their appearance. Sarah's phone started ringing immediately. Her co-workers from the diner. Old friends she hadn't heard from in years. Strangers who had seen the news and wanted to offer support. And then, late that night, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Martinez? This is Dr. Catherine Wells. I'm the superintendent of the school district. I saw the news segment tonight. Sarah's heart stopped. Here it comes, she thought. The final rejection. But Dr. Wells continued, her voice warm. I had no idea about the situation with your son and these veterans. I'm appalled at how this has been handled. I want to meet with you and Mr. Frank on Monday morning. And I want to personally invite these men to Career Day. All 30 of them. Sarah couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Mrs. Martinez? Are you there? Yes, Sarah managed. Yes, we'll be there. When she hung up, she called Frank and told him everything. Then she walked into Tommy's room, where he was already asleep, and watched him in the dim light from the hallway. His face was peaceful, innocent. Things are gonna get better, baby, she whispered. Promise. Monday morning, Sarah took time off from both jobs. She met Frank at the district office, both of them dressed as professionally as they could manage. Dr. Wells was a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She didn't waste time. I've reviewed the complaints made by Principal Henderson and Mrs. Bradford. I've also looked into the background of your organization, Mr. Frank. Every single one of your members has a clean record. Several are educators themselves. This should never have been an issue. She turned to Sarah. I apologize on behalf of the district. We failed your son. We failed to see the prejudice in our own system. Frank spoke up. We don't want apologies, ma'am. We want the chance to show those kids and their parents who we really are. Dr. Wells smiled. You'll have it. Career Day is next Friday. I'll personally ensure that every parent knows you'll be there. And I'll be there too. When they left the office, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. Frank put a hand on her shoulder. You did this, he said. You didn't give up. We did this, Sarah corrected. All of us. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, Sarah knew the real test was still coming. Career Day would either change everything or confirm everyone's worst fears. She had no idea it would become something much bigger than anyone imagined. The week leading up to Career Day felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She worked her shifts at the diner and the supermarket, but her mind was always elsewhere, running through every possible scenario. What if parents pulled their kids out? What if there was a protest? What if this backfired and made everything worse for Tommy? Frank called her every night. Sometimes they talked about the plan for Friday. Sometimes they just talked about life. Sarah found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone since her father died. She told him about her fears, about the guilt she carried for not being enough, about the exhaustion that lived in her bones. You are enough, Frank would say every time. More than enough. On Thursday night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept checking her phone, reading and rereading the email Dr. Wells had sent to all parents about Career Day. It was diplomatic but clear. Veterans from a local mentorship program would be presenting, and their participation was valued and welcomed. The comments on the school's Facebook page were split. Half the parents were supportive, thanking the school for including diverse voices. The other half were outraged, with Cheryl Bradford leading the charge. She had posted a long message about protecting children and maintaining standards, though she never said directly what she was protecting them from. Tommy noticed Sarah's anxiety. The night before Career Day, he climbed into her lap while she was sitting on the couch, something he hadn't done in a while. Are you scared, Mom? He asked. Sarah thought about lying, about being the strong mother who had all the answers. But Tommy deserved honesty. A little bit, she admitted. I'm scared people won't give them a chance. Tommy was quiet for a moment, his small hand playing with the edge of her shirt. Frank told me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Sarah's eyes burned. When did he tell you that? When those boys pushed me. I told him I was scared to go back to school. And he said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about not letting fear stop you from being who you're meant to be. Sarah held him tighter. You are so much braver than I ever was at your age. I learned it from you, Tommy said simply. Friday morning arrived with clear blue skies. Sarah dropped Tommy off at school early, watching as he walked toward the entrance with his head held high. Frank and the other men would arrive at 9, when career day officially started. Sarah had taken the entire day off work. She needed to be there, to see this through no matter what happened. She arrived at the school at 8:45. The parking lot was already full. Parents were gathering near the entrance, and Sarah could see the divide immediately. Some held signs that said "Thank you veterans" and "Support our mentors." Others stood with Cheryl Bradford, their faces tight with disapproval. Sarah's stomach churned. This was really happening. Then she heard them, the rumble of 30 motorcycles coming down the street, perfectly synchronized. The sound was powerful, commanding, impossible to ignore. Sarah watched as the bikes turned into the parking lot, each one gleaming in the morning sun. American flags attached to several of them. The men parked in formation. They dismounted together, removed their helmets together, and stood at attention. They wore their leather vests, but underneath, Sarah could see they had dressed respectfully. Button-down shirts, clean jeans, polished boots. They looked like what they were: veterans, fathers, men of honor. Frank spotted Sarah and gave her a small nod. "We're ready." Dr. Wells emerged from the school building, her presence immediately commanding attention. She walked directly to Frank and shook his hand, making sure everyone could see. Then she turned to address the crowd of parents. "Good morning, everyone. Today, we have the privilege of hosting 30 veterans who have served our country with distinction. These men have volunteered their time to mentor children in our community, including students at this school. I expect them to be treated with the respect they have earned." Cheryl Bradford stepped forward. "Dr. Wells, many parents have concerns about this. We weren't properly consulted." Dr. Wells' expression hardened. "Mrs. Bradford, these men have undergone background checks and have been cleared by our district. Unless you have a legitimate safety concern based on facts rather than appearances, I suggest you step aside." The tension was thick enough to cut. For a moment, Sarah thought Cheryl might actually leave. But then she stepped back, her face red with barely contained anger. The men walked into the school. Sarah followed, her heart pounding. Tommy's classroom was down the hall on the left. Second grade, Mrs. Peterson's class. When they reached the door, Sarah could see through the window. 22 second graders sat at their desks, their eyes wide. Tommy was in the third row, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. Mrs. Peterson, a young teacher in her late 20s, opened the door. She smiled at the men. "Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here." They filed in, these large men in a small classroom, and somehow they made themselves gentle. They didn't crowd the space. They stood along the walls, letting the children adjust to their presence. Frank stepped forward. "Good morning, kids. My name is Frank. How many of you know what a veteran is?" Several hands went up. A girl in the front row said, "Someone who was in the army." "That's right," Frank said. "A veteran is someone who served in the military. All of us in this room today are veterans. We served in different branches, in different wars, in different parts of the world. But we all served for the same reason, to protect people like you." He talked for 10 minutes about service, about sacrifice, about what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. The children listened, transfixed. Even the ones who had been squirming in their seats sat still. Then Marcus stepped forward. "I was a Marine," he said, "and now I'm a math teacher at the high school. Being in the military taught me discipline, respect, and teamwork. Those same lessons help me every day in the classroom." One by one, the men shared their stories. Pete talked about overcoming his injury and starting his food truck. Miguel talked about the importance of mental health and taking care of each other. Each story was age-appropriate, honest, and powerful. But it was what happened next that changed everything. A boy in the back row, one of the kids who had been bullying Tommy, raised his hand. His name was Derek, and Sarah had heard his name before, always in the context of trouble. Derek's voice was small when he spoke. "My dad was in the army, but he doesn't live with us anymore." The room went quiet. Frank walked over and knelt beside Derek's desk. "What's your name, son?" "Derek." "Derek, is your dad a veteran?" The boy nodded, his eyes getting wet. But he's different now. He gets angry a lot. My mom says the war changed him. Frank's expression was infinitely gentle. The war changes all of us, Derek. But that doesn't mean your dad doesn't love you. Sometimes men come home carrying heavy things inside them, and they don't know how to put them down. That's not your fault. Derek wiped his eyes. I miss him. I bet he misses you too. Frank put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Would it be okay if I gave you my number? Maybe I could talk to your mom. See if there's a way we can help your family. Derek nodded eagerly. Sarah watched as something shifted in the room. The other children were looking at the men differently now. Not with fear or suspicion, but with curiosity and respect. A girl raised her hand. Do you help other kids like Tommy? We try to, Marcus answered. We believe every kid deserves to have people in their life who show up for them, who teach them, who care about them. Another boy asked, can you teach us about motorcycles? Pete laughed. If your parents say it's okay, we'd be happy to. The questions came faster then. What's it like to ride a motorcycle? Did you ever get scared in the war? Can girls be in the military too? How do you become a veteran? The men answered every question with patience and honesty. When the class period ended, Mrs. Peterson had to practically push the children toward the door for recess. Before Tommy left, he ran to Frank and hugged him. Frank hugged him back, and Sarah saw several of the other men wipe their eyes. The men spent the entire day rotating through different classrooms, kindergarten through 5th grade. Every class had the same reaction. Initial curiosity, then engagement, then genuine connection. By lunchtime, kids were asking when the bikers could come back. But the real moment came during the assembly. Dr. Wells had organized an afternoon gathering in the gymnasium for all the parents who wanted to attend. Sarah was terrified. This was where everything could fall apart. This was where the opposition could speak up, where Cheryl Bradford could rally her forces. The gym filled quickly. Sarah spotted Cheryl and her group sitting together, arms crossed, faces set. But she also saw many more parents scattered throughout, looking open and interested. Dr. Wells took the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Today has been extraordinary. Our students have had the opportunity to learn from men who have given so much for our country. I'd like to invite Frank to say a few words. Frank walked to the center of the gym. He looked at the crowd, these parents who held their children's futures in their hands, and he spoke from the heart. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you should trust us because we're veterans. Service doesn't make us perfect. It doesn't mean we have all the answers. What I will tell you is this. We're here because we believe every child deserves to feel valued. Every kid should have adults in their life who show up, who listen, who care. He paused, looking directly at the section where Cheryl sat. Some of you look at us and see danger. You see the leather, the motorcycles, the tattoos, and you make assumptions. I understand that. We look different. We sound different. But I ask you to look deeper. Look at what we do, not how we look. Judge us by our actions, not your fears. A parent in the middle section stood up. Sarah's heart stopped. Was this it? The moment everything collapsed? But the man who stood was smiling. My son is in Mrs. Peterson's class. He came to lunch today and told me about Derek's dad. He said you offered to help. My brother is a veteran struggling with PTSD. Could you help him too? Frank nodded. Absolutely. That's what we do. Another parent stood. Then another. Each one sharing a story, asking for help, expressing gratitude. The tide was turning, Sarah could feel it. Then Cheryl Bradford stood up. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. I have been a member of this community for 15 years. Cheryl began, her voice sharp. I have raised 3 children in this school district, and I have always put their safety first. Here it comes, Sarah thought. But Cheryl's voice cracked. And today, I watched my youngest son, who has struggled with anxiety and fear since his grandfather died last year, light up for the first time in months. He came home and told me he wants to be like the veterans when he grows up. He said they were heroes. She wiped her eyes, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. I was wrong. I judged you before I knew you. I let my fear cloud my judgment. And I'm sorry. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Cheryl Bradford, the woman who had tried so hard to keep the veterans away, publicly apologize. Frank walked over to Cheryl and extended his hand. She took it, and then, to everyone's surprise, she hugged him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I'm so sorry." Frank patted her back gently. "We all do the best we can with what we know. Now you know better." The assembly continued for another hour. Parent after parent stood up to share stories, to ask questions, to offer support. A mother whose husband had died in combat asked if the men could help her teenage son who was struggling. A father who worked long hours asked if there was room for one more kid in the mentorship program. A teacher asked if the veterans would consider doing a weekly presentation on history and civics. By the time it ended, Frank had collected 17 phone numbers and email addresses. The program that had started with one little boy was about to expand to help dozens of families. Principal Henderson, who had been conspicuously quiet during the assembly, approached Sarah afterward. His expression was humble, almost ashamed. "Mrs. Martinez, I owe you an apology. I should have taken the time to learn who these men were before making assumptions. I let bureaucracy and fear guide my decisions instead of doing what was best for Tommy." Sarah wanted to be angry. Part of her still was. But she was too exhausted, too emotionally drained, and too relieved that it was over. "Just make sure it doesn't happen to another family," she said quietly. "I won't," he promised. "In fact, I'd like to make this mentorship program an official partnership with the school. If Frank and his men are willing." Frank, who had been standing nearby, joined the conversation. "We'd be honored, sir." As the crowd dispersed, Tommy ran to Sarah and threw his arms around her waist. "Mom, did you see? Everyone loved them." Derek asked if Frank could meet his dad. And Sophia asked if I wanted to play at recess on Monday. Sarah knelt down to his level, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You were so brave through all of this. You were brave too, Mom. You didn't give up." That evening, the entire group gathered at the warehouse to celebrate. Someone had brought pizza, someone else had brought a cake. The men were in high spirits, joking and laughing, reliving the moments from the day. Sarah stood to the side with a paper plate, watching Tommy run around with a foam football, playing catch with Marcus and Pete. He was glowing, radiating joy in a way she had never seen before. Frank appeared beside her. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it came out thick with emotion. "You gave me my son back. He was disappearing, becoming smaller and quieter every day. And you brought him back to life." Frank smiled. "He was always there, Sarah. He just needed permission to shine. And you gave him that by refusing to accept the world's limitations. I couldn't have done this without you. Without all of you. That's the thing about family. You don't have to do it alone." Over the next few weeks, life shifted into a new rhythm. The mentorship program officially partnered with the school district. Frank and his men started doing weekly visits to 3 different elementary schools. Local news picked up the story, and soon the program was receiving donations and offers of support from across Arizona. Derek's mother reached out to Frank, and he connected her family with VA resources. Derek's father started therapy and began attending veteran support groups that Miguel ran. Within 2 months, Derek's parents were working on reconciliation, and Derek himself had stopped bullying entirely. He and Tommy became friends, bonded by their shared experience of having complicated relationships with their fathers. Cheryl Bradford became one of the program's biggest advocates. She used her position in the PDA to organize fundraisers and recruit more volunteers. When Sarah ran into her at the grocery store one afternoon, Cheryl hugged her. "Thank you for not giving up," Cheryl said. "Thank you for showing me that I was wrong." Sarah still worked 2 jobs. Money was still tight, and there were still nights when she fell into bed so exhausted she couldn't move. But something fundamental had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. When her car broke down, Miguel fixed it. When she couldn't afford Tommy's field trip fee, Marcus quietly paid it. When she got sick and couldn't work for 3 days, the men organized a meal train and brought food to her apartment. They took care of her the way she had been taking care of Tommy all these years. Completely, without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months after career day, Frank took Tommy to a motorcycle show. Sarah had the day off and decided to use the time to clean the apartment. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor when there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Sarah Martinez? Yes. My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm with the Phoenix Family Foundation. We saw the news story about you and the Veteran Mentorship Program. We'd like to offer you a grant. Sarah blinked. A grant? Jennifer nodded. $20,000. To help with living expenses, to give you the breathing room to maybe go back to school or reduce your work hours. You've been working so hard to give your son a good life while advocating for other families. We want to support that. Sarah's knees went weak. She had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. $20,000. That was more money than she had seen in her entire life. I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? Because you're exactly the kind of person we were created to help. Single parents who are doing everything right but still struggling because the system is broken. You're changing your community, Sarah. Let us help you change your life too. Sarah invited Jennifer inside, and they talked for over an hour. The grant had no strings attached. Sarah could use it however she needed. Jennifer also mentioned that the foundation was looking for someone to help coordinate their family support programs. It was a part-time position, but it paid well and had benefits. Would you be interested? Jennifer asked. Sarah thought about the diner, about standing on her feet for 8 hours smelling like grease and coffee. She thought about the supermarket, about scanning items until her wrists ached. She thought about falling asleep exhausted every night, barely seeing Tommy during the week. Yes, she said. Yes, I'm interested. When Tommy came home that evening, his face sunburned and happy from the motorcycle show, Sarah told him everything. His eyes went wide. Does this mean you don't have to work at 2 places anymore? It means I might be able to work one job that I actually like. And it means we might be able to move to a better apartment. Maybe one with heat that actually works. Tommy hugged her so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Is this real, Mom? Is this really happening? Is this real, baby? Is all real? That night, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah called Frank and told him about the grant and the job offer. See? Frank said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Good things come to good people. I never would have believed that before, Sarah admitted. I thought life was just about surviving, about getting through each day without falling apart. And now I think maybe it's about more than that. Maybe it's about finding your people. The ones who show up when everyone else walks away. You're our people too, Sarah. You know that, right? You and Tommy, you're part of this family now. Sarah wiped her eyes. I know. The job with the Phoenix Family Foundation started a month later. Sarah gave notice at both the diner and the supermarket. Her last day at the diner, her coworkers threw her a small party. Even the manager, who had always been so critical, admitted that he would miss her. You're doing something important, he said gruffly. Good luck. Sarah's new position involved connecting struggling families with resources, organizing support networks, and advocating for policy changes. It was challenging work, but it was meaningful. She was helping people the way Frank and his men had helped her. Tommy thrived in ways Sarah had only dreamed of. His grades improved. He made friends. He joined the school's science club and discovered a passion for astronomy that rivaled his love of dinosaurs. Every Saturday, he still spent time with Frank and the other veterans, but now other kids joined them too. The group had grown to mentor over 40 children across the Phoenix area. 6 months after Career Day, the program received a commendation from the mayor. There was a ceremony at City Hall, and Frank insisted that Sarah and Tommy be there. When the mayor called Frank to the stage, Frank brought Tommy with him. This young man right here, Frank said into the microphone, his hand on Tommy's shoulder, is why we do this. Not because he needed saving, but because he deserved to be seen. Every child does. And when we show up for them, when we choose to see their worth instead of their circumstances, we don't just change their lives. They change ours. The audience applauded, and Tommy beamed. his confidence a stark contrast to the quiet, withdrawn boy he had been a year ago. That night, Sarah lay in bed in their new apartment, a two-bedroom with working heat and windows that didn't let in drafts. She could hear Tommy in the next room, talking to himself as he played with the telescope Frank had given him for his birthday. She thought about everything that had changed. The job, the apartment, the community they had built. But more than any of that, she thought about hope. Real, tangible hope that the future could be better than the past. Her phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Not just for today, but for every day. You're stronger than you know. Sarah smiled and typed back. We all are. We just need the right people to remind us. She fell asleep that night with a peace she hadn't felt in 7 years. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're not alone. The kind that comes from being seen, valued, and loved by people who chose you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. 3 years later, Sarah stood in the parking lot of Phoenix Elementary School on a warm April morning, watching as 30 motorcycles pulled up in perfect formation. But this time, it wasn't just the original group. The program had expanded. There were now over 70 veterans involved, men and women from all branches of military service, all dedicated to mentoring children across the Phoenix metropolitan area. Tommy was 10 now, tall for his age, with the same green eyes but a confidence that radiated from every movement. He stood beside Sarah, wearing a vest that Frank had given him, a junior member patch sewn onto the back. He had earned it, Frank said, by showing up for other kids the way the veterans had shown up for him. Today was special. It was the 3rd annual Veterans Mentorship Day, an event that had grown from that single career day into a citywide celebration. Schools across Phoenix participated, inviting veterans to speak, teach, and connect with students. The event had become so successful that other cities in Arizona were starting their own programs, using Phoenix as a model. Sarah now worked full-time as the program coordinator for the Phoenix Family Foundation. She had earned her associate degree in social work through night classes, studying at the kitchen table after Tommy went to bed, determined to be better equipped to help the families she served. Frank had watched Tommy on those evenings, helping him with homework and teaching him life skills that couldn't be found in textbooks. The motorcycles rumbled to a stop, and the riders dismounted. Frank was 70 now, his hair completely white, his movements a little slower. But his eyes were still sharp, still kind, still seeing straight through to the heart of people. He walked over to Sarah and Tommy, pulling them both into a hug. You ready for today, kiddo? He asked Tommy. Tommy nodded eagerly. I get to help with the 2nd graders. I'm going to tell them about the telescope and how you taught me about constellations. That's my boy, Frank said, ruffling his hair. Marcus approached, his arm around a teenage girl. This is my daughter, Emma. We reconnected 2 years ago, and she moved back to Arizona 6 months ago. Sarah remembered Marcus's story from that first meeting, the pain in his voice when he talked about losing contact with his daughters. Emma, she said warmly, it's wonderful to meet you. Emma smiled shyly. Dad talks about you and Tommy all the time. He says you're the reason he didn't give up. Marcus looked embarrassed but didn't deny it. Helping Tommy helped me remember what it felt like to be a dad. When Emma reached out, I was ready. I knew how to show up because I'd been practicing every Saturday. Miguel walked over with Derek and Derek's father, a man in his mid-40s with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. Derek had grown too, no longer the angry child who had bullied Tommy. He and Tommy were best friends now, inseparable at school and on weekends. Derek's father, James, extended his hand to Sarah. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you. When Frank reached out, when he got me connected to the VA, I was in a dark place. I thought I'd lost my family forever. But you didn't, Sarah said gently. You fought for them, because someone showed me it was worth fighting for. James put his hand on Derek's shoulder. My son has his dad back. My wife and I are better than ever. That's because of what you all started here. Pete rolled up in his food truck, which was now a regular fixture at community events. He had expanded his business, hired 3 employees, and was talking about opening a 2nd location. The prosthetic arm he wore was state-of-the-art now, funded by donations that had poured in after the news coverage of the mentorship program. "Fresh coffee and breakfast burritos," he announced. "Let's feed these heroes before they change the world." As they ate and prepared for the day, Sarah watched the interactions around her. She saw veterans mentoring not just children now, but also helping each other. She saw families that had been struggling finding community and support. She saw a network of care that extended far beyond what any of them had imagined that first day when Frank showed up with 30 men at a park. Cheryl Bradford arrived with her youngest son, who was now in 5th grade and an active volunteer in the program. She had become one of Sarah's closest friends, proving that people could change when given the chance. Cheryl hugged Sarah. "I have the final numbers. This year's event has over 300 veterans participating across 20 schools. We've raised enough money to fund the program for the next 2 years, and we have a waiting list of over 100 families requesting mentorship." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe it. 3 years ago, we were fighting just to be allowed in one school. That's what happens when you plant good seeds," Cheryl said. "They grow into forests." Dr. Wells, who had retired from the superintendent position but remained involved with the program as an advisor, gathered everyone for a brief meeting before they dispersed to different schools. 3 years ago, she said, her voice strong and clear, "we almost made a terrible mistake. We almost let fear and prejudice rob our children of something beautiful. But one mother refused to accept that. One woman stood up and said, 'No, my son deserves better.' And 30 veterans answered that call." She looked at Sarah. "We owe you a debt of gratitude. You changed this city." Sarah felt her face flush. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. Every person here chose to show up, chose to fight for something bigger than themselves. And we'll keep showing up," Frank added. "As long as there are kids who need us, we'll be here." The group dispersed to their assigned schools. Sarah and Tommy rode with Frank to Phoenix Elementary, the place where it had all started. As they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah noticed something new. A banner hung over the entrance. "Welcome, veterans. Thank you for your service." Inside, the hallways were decorated with student artwork, drawings of flags and motorcycles and men and women in uniform. The energy was electric, children bouncing with excitement, teachers smiling and waving. Tommy's old classroom, Mrs. Peterson's room, was first on their schedule. She had requested specifically that Frank and Tommy present together. When they walked in, the second graders gasped and pointed. They had heard stories about the boy who had started it all, the kid who had brought the veterans to their school. Tommy stood at the front of the classroom with a confidence Sarah still marveled at. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Tommy Martinez. When I was in 2nd grade, I sat right there," he pointed to a desk in the 3rd row, "and I felt alone. I felt like I didn't matter because I didn't have a dad." The children listened, transfixed. "But then I met Frank and his friends. They showed me that family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who shows up. It's about who sees you and chooses to care." Frank took over, telling the story of that first meeting at the park, of Sarah's bravery in reaching out, of the decision 30 men made to show up for one little boy. He talked about how that decision had rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives. After the presentation, a small girl in the front row raised her hand. "My daddy died in the war. Do you think he was a hero?" Frank knelt down beside her desk. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily." "Lily, your daddy was absolutely a hero. He served his country with honor. And I bet if he could see you right now, he'd be so proud of the brave, smart girl you're becoming." Lily smiled through her tears. "Do you think he can see me?" "I do," Frank said softly. "And I think he's watching over you every day." After school, there was a community gathering in the park where Sarah had first met Frank 3 years ago. Hundreds of people attended, families who had been touched by the program, veterans who had found purpose through mentorship, community members who wanted to show their support. The mayor spoke, praising the program and announcing that the city was allocating funding to expand it even further. Local businesses pledged donations. A grant writer announced they had secured federal funding to take the program statewide. But the most powerful moment came when children who had been mentored took the microphone to share their stories. Derek spoke about how the program had saved his family. A girl named Sophia talked about learning to believe in herself. A boy named Marcus Jr., named after his mentor, shared how having positive male role models had changed his life trajectory from heading toward gangs to dreaming of college. Tommy was the last to speak. He walked to the microphone, no longer the small, uncertain boy he had been. He looked at the crowd, at his mother, at Frank, at the sea of leather vests and American flags. 3 years ago, I thought I was broken because I didn't have a father. I thought something was wrong with me. But Frank taught me that I wasn't broken. I was just waiting for the right people to see me. His voice grew stronger. Today, I want to tell every kid who feels alone, every kid who thinks they don't matter, that you do. You matter so much. And there are people out there, good people, who are waiting to show up for you. You just have to be brave enough to let them. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah was crying openly now, Frank's arm around her shoulders. She looked at her son, this brave, beautiful boy who had been through so much and come out stronger. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fear and pain and struggle, and how it had all led to this moment. As the sun began to set, painting the Phoenix sky in shades of orange and pink, the gathering slowly dispersed. Families hugged, contact information was exchanged, new mentorship matches were made. The cycle continued, spreading wider with each passing day. Frank found Sarah sitting on a bench, watching Tommy play catch with a group of younger kids, naturally taking on the role of mentor himself. He's going to do great things, that boy, Frank said, sitting beside her. He already has, Sarah replied. He taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, that accepting love isn't failure, that community is everything. Frank smiled. You taught us something too. You reminded us why we served. Not for recognition or glory, but for this. For moments like these. For the chance to make a difference in the life of one child, one family, one community at a time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the park filled with laughter and connection. This place that had once been the site of Sarah's deepest fear, where she had stood watching her son alone and isolated, was now a symbol of hope and transformation. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer Morrison at the Phoenix Family Foundation. Just got word that the program has been selected for national recognition. You'll need to travel to Washington, D.C. next month for the ceremony. Congratulations, you've changed countless lives. Sarah showed the text to Frank. He whistled low. Washington, D.C. That's big time. Sarah laughed. Who would have thought? A single mom from a 2-bedroom apartment changing national policy. That's exactly who changes the world, Frank said. The people who have something to fight for. As darkness fell and the park lights came on, Tommy ran over, breathless and happy. Mom, can Marcus and Derek sleep over this weekend? We want to work on our science project together. Of course, baby. And Frank, can you teach us how to change a tire? Marcus's dad said it's an important life skill. Frank grinned. Absolutely. Saturday morning, my place. Tommy hugged them both and ran back to his friends. Sarah watched him go. This child who had once been so small and uncertain, now confident and capable and kind. She thought about everything that had changed. Not just the circumstances of their lives, the better job and apartment and financial security, but the fundamental shift in how they moved through the world. They were no longer alone, no longer fighting every battle in isolation. They had family, chosen family, the best kind. Frank stood up, stretching. I should get going. Early morning tomorrow. We're meeting with a school district in Tucson about starting a program there. Sarah stood too, hugging him tightly. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For seeing us. For not giving up. Thank you for letting us in, Frank replied. You gave 30 broken men a purpose. You gave us a reason to keep going. As Frank walked toward his motorcycle, Sarah called out to him. Frank? He turned. I love you. You know that, right? Your family. Frank's eyes glistened in the park lights. I love you too, kiddo. You and Tommy both. Always will. Sarah gathered Tommy and Derek and Marcus, loading them into her car for the drive home. As they pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror at the 3 boys in the back seat, talking and laughing and planning their weekend adventures. This was what happiness looked like. This was what community felt like. This was what happened when one person refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose, when they reached out for help instead of drowning in silence, when they believed that things could be better. That night, after the boys had finally fallen asleep in sleeping bags on the living room floor, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She opened her laptop and began writing, documenting the journey from that first desperate email to this moment, 3 years later, when their small act of courage had grown into a movement. She wrote for the families still struggling, still alone, still thinking they had to carry everything by themselves. She wrote to tell them that help existed, that community was possible, that change was real. And if you're reading this story, if something in it resonated with you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling these stories. We're going to keep showing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. Leave a comment below telling us what this story meant to you. And if you know a family that needs support, a child who feels alone, or a veteran looking for purpose, reach out. Be the Frank in someone's story. Be the person who shows up, because that's how we change the world. Not with grand gestures or sweeping reforms, though those matter too, but with the daily choice to see each other, to care for each other, to show up for each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the living room doorway, looking at the 3 boys sleeping peacefully. Tommy's arm was thrown over Derek's shoulder. Marcus was snoring softly. They looked like brothers. Tomorrow, Sarah would go to work coordinating support for more families. Frank would meet with veterans about expanding the program. Tommy would go to school and be the friend to someone else that he had always needed. Derek would continue healing, growing stronger every day. Marcus would play soccer and dream about college. And somewhere in Phoenix, in Tucson, in cities across Arizona and beyond, more families would reach out. More veterans would answer. More children would discover that they mattered, that they were seen, that they were loved. The cycle would continue. The family would grow. And the message would spread. You are not alone. You never were. You just needed the right people to show up and prove it. Sarah turned off the lights and went to bed, her heart full, her mind at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new stories to tell. But tonight, she would rest in the knowledge that she had done what her younger self never thought possible. She had asked for help. She had built a community. She had changed the world, one small act of courage at a time. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Phoenix, she would wake up and do it all over again. Because that's what family does. They show up. They keep going. They never give up. Not ever.